Yeah, I don't know. Where'd you get it?
From my grandma when I got it when she came to visit from Pakistan.
She just brought you an egg?
She brought us a lot of random shit, yeah.
Like,
Including
is there
this egg.
a historical significance of Pakistani
I
eggs?
don't think so. I think it's just like a colorful wooden egg. But I really liked it, so I guess she's onto something.
Yeah, nice. It looks easy to fit into a suitcase.
Yeah.
All right, we're recording. Welcome to The Field Between, a podcast where we talk about reading that interests us and topics. I'm Ahmed, and I'm joined by my wife, Professor Floodeen Ali. Professor?
I'm Yasmin. Hi, everyone.
Yes. I can start calling you that because you're you taught your last day as a grad student.
I did. I defend June 5th, so after that I'll be, inshallah, a doctor for real.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. That's a big step.
Thank you.
And you're enjoying... Were you unemployed the last time we...
I think I was.
Recorded?
I'm trying to remember. Yeah.
Did you have another day of teaching?
No, I think last time we recorded, it was just last Sunday. It was like our 2-year anniversary. So I had been unemployed for a week.
Right. That's
but
right.
happy to report that unemployment's still going
Still
very
going,
well.
still
I'm
good.
still a fan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been nice.
Nice.
We're also almost exactly a month out from moving now. It's May 21st and we moved June 22nd.
Oh shit, it's already May 21st.
Yeah, we're like really getting down to the wire. We had we got to talk about one of these episodes, but Ahmed does a really cool thing called Caravanserai. And one iteration of Caravanserai are that we have open houses at our house. And so we had the last one yesterday, which was so fun, but a little emotional, honestly.
Yeah.
Because there's just like a lot of people that we're really going to miss. And we just felt
Yeah.
very loved and very lucky.
Yeah, the house was like full.
Yeah. How many people do you think
hot.
we had? It did get kind of hot. I think we had
I stopped counting.
potentially 40-ish people.
Yeah.
Like throughout the course, not all at once. But
I think more.
you think more? It
Yeah.
might have been more like 50, yeah.
Because I made I probably made like 50 cups of chai. And it was
Oh,
all
that's a
gone.
good barometer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all gone. Yeah.
All gone.
And now every weekend until we leave, we've kind of got something going on. So next weekend, we're going to Asheville for the last time. I mean, maybe not ever, but while we live in North Carolina
Yeah.
to celebrate our anniversary. And then the week after that is the last caravan. Oh, no, you're going to Charlotte to see your best friend. Potentially you'll go to Charlotte. If not, we'll have a chill weekend here. And then the week after that is the last outdoor caravanserai.
Yep.
And then the week after that, we're going to Thomasville to say goodbye to your parents.
Back to the 336. We'll try to put in a visit to Winston-Salem, which we've been wanting to go to.
I'd like to add that on to the Thomasville trip. I've got a good friend in Winston-Salem that I feel bad I haven't gone out to see her for a bit.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I haven't really been to Winston. I think I've been to Winston once since like graduating from college, maybe.
Annie reps
And-
Winston real hard. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
I'm sure she'd love to show us around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see how it's changed
Mhm.
since I was like in the area for high school.
This is like a kind of sweet thing about North Carolina, but also an annoying thing. I feel like when you live here, you kind of like, I feel like we're saying goodbye to the whole state.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like it's not really because things are a little more spread out. There's so many beautiful things and so many things that we'll miss, but they're not even all really even our immediate area.
Yeah.
Like if we didn't go to Asheville one last time, that'd be really sad, for example.
Yeah, like when you left New York, you didn't go to like upstate
Right,
New York.
exactly.
Bye,
It's pretty
Albany.
much like, exactly. It was just
Goodbye,
like bye to New York.
New Rochelle.
Right.
Bye Yonkers.
I mean, in fact, things have
do you
changed.
even know these places?
I was going to say I barely have been outside of New York City. I haven't seen much of New York.
Yonkers?
I've been to Yonkers. Yeah, that's like right across. Like,
New Rochelle?
I don't think I've been to New Rochelle that I'm aware of. I've definitely been to Yonkers. I've been to like New Paltz and
Monroe?
Albany. I have not been to Monroe. I've never even heard of that. I don't know. I've been to Kingston. I'd love to explore the Hudson River Valley more,
I
though.
know
It's
shit
beautiful.
about New York. Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
anyway, how are we doing besides that? I'm trying to think of any other updates. I feel like that's the major one.
That's the big thing.
Oh, we have like
alright.
sad political updates for our state,
Oh
which we don't
my
have
God.
to give, but abortion is
Yeah.
now illegal after 12 weeks. That's a bummer.
There's
some
that,
exceptions.
and the way that it came about is because the Republicans have a supermajority because one of the Democratic legislatures at a very convenient time. I'm expecting a piece of like investigative reporting on this
Absolutely.
at some point.
Yeah.
But, so she switched over to being Republican which honestly, I feel like when that happens, you should be recalled.
Absolutely, because
immediately.
you were voted for under like false pretenses. Absolutely, I agree with that. I
Yeah.
can't believe that's legal to just change party affiliation when it has such
Yeah.
serious ramifications for us in a purple state.
But she changed. I mean, I guess the affiliation is just kind of making it official, because it would have been weird for her as a Democrat to vote with the Republicans to override the governor's veto.
Yeah, I mean, she also
So I
has
guess it gave her some cover, but
the same exact person. I was talking to folks last night. Actually, I didn't even know this, but she has spoken publicly about getting an abortion. So
yeah,
it's
no,
really
I mean, she's
truly
on record
incredible.
From like
Yeah.
2013,
Yeah.
I saw a series of tweets that she made in 2013 that was just like, we have to make sure that we protect
Yeah.
abortion rights. So,
Super depressing.
I feel like I don't know. I don't know if it's like fast and loose with the accusations here, but there's got to be some more money in her bank account.
100%. No, I mean, I think everyone's been saying that. Like, it's like you don't want to be conspiracy theorists, but she must have gotten paid off. Like something feels
Why
wrong.
else would you do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Or like some sort of promise of future position. Like something is not right. Yeah.
That's Southern Democrats for you.
Yeah,
An absolute
real.
piece of shit. Rest in piss.
Yeah.
Trisha, what's her name? Trisha
I don't remember her full name.
Cotham?
Something. Yeah. But yeah, that's been a
Trish.
real bummer, honestly. And we know a lot of people who like work in reproductive rights, and it's been like a really palpable loss. And people are still doing
Yeah.
good work, and there's still fundraising to get people out of the state if they need abortions. And I mean, it's still legal before 12 weeks, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Yeah. Oh, I took a train today.
For the first time, right?
Well, for the first time in the U.S. outside of like New York City and I think Seattle.
So the first time
First
you took
Amtrak.
first Amtrak, first
Yeah.
like cross country train, though you just took it between
Yeah.
two
I took
cities.
a train to because we don't have a car this week.
Should we say why?
That's up to you.
I crashed our car.
Yeah.
But anyway, you
So,
took a train.
Yasmin had a little accident earlier in the week.
Everyone's
so we're
safe.
with that.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, everyone's safe. But for the week while we were without a car, I wanted to go to my favorite bakery, which just reopened in its new location. So Bolted Bread. And
Ahmed is
Raleigh.
the biggest proponent of
Yeah.
Bolted Bread. He's such a sweetheart.
Yeah,
he
I
like
love it.
honestly should get paid by Bolted for the number of people he's brought there. But Bolted's amazing. I mean, it's well deserved. But
Yeah. So I wanted to go to the bakery, get some pastries because we're kind of nearing the end of our time in North Carolina. And so I booked a train ticket, and I thought it was like a really fun ride.
you took
Definitely.
business class, right?
Yeah, I took
Just to see what it was like.
I was like, what is the business class like? And it honestly wasn't that great. I imagine like coach would have been like totally adequate.
But it's like fun because it's like a short trip. Why not try it? Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, it wasn't that much more expensive or anything like that for the short trip. But it kind of very much felt like a 70s or 80s kind of like
Because it is.
car.
I love Amtrak. I take it a lot because I can't drive outside of the Triangle, and yeah, it definitely feels like you're in the 70s.
Yeah. But I imagine it's how people went to their favorite bakery in 1848.
That's so cute.
You know?
Yeah.
It's
How
probably
long
good.
was your ride?
Well, so the train was like 15 or 20 minutes late.
Seriously, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was. We were supposed to board at like 9:27, I think, and then the train didn't get there until 9:50.
Oi, that's not common. Actually, I would say that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and then it just took it was like a 30-minute ride.
So basically, as long as it takes a drive.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we
Yeah.
had a rail, man, it would be so nice. Like, because
It
Amtrak
was so chill.
has kind of like
It's great.
random times.
Yeah.
But if we had like a regular subway line or just a rail between the three like cities, like this would be such an amazing place to live. It already is, but it would be like truly amazing.
Yeah.
Because traffic is getting like unbearable. Even if you can't really drive like me, for
Mhm.
everyone, it's getting unbearable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you get some good pastries?
I did. It was incredible, and I got to see a little behind the scenes of the new space.
I
which
can't
was
wait to see
cool.
it.
Yeah, it was awesome.
My
experience.
related updates are I had no coffee this morning because Ahmed was not here. And
Yeah.
he makes me coffee every morning. So
And I
I
feel like
made instant coffee and it was very bad.
Yeah, and I've been wanting to teach you my method of making the coffee you like.
I don't want to learn.
And you
I just
don't
want to be provided
learn.
for.
Yeah, you just want.
I just want to be spoiled. But it also
then when I'm
speaks
taking the
to.
train,
I was gonna say it speaks to how many mornings you're here. Exactly. That's the one time you were on a train. I really felt it.
yeah.
I was pretty sad.
Hmm.
Yeah. My other update is that when I crashed the car, Ahmed couldn't have been sweeter. I'm very lucky. He texted me and he
Yeah.
was like, "You're still improving," which I don't know if that's true or not, but it was nice to hear.
Well, progress is not linear.
This is
People
really
say.
not. I crashed our car for the first time, I think almost exactly a year ago. So
I think if you were to chart your progress, it would be like an upward trend with zigzaggy.
yeah, that sounds right.
This is a
zag.
a zag down. Yeah. But overall statistically, if we look at the long run, we'd probably put it in as an outlier, and we'd probably get rid of it in the data set.
I can run
overall.
more errands and stuff now. I don't know, man. Honestly, it's really bad. But when we moved to Pittsburgh, I think I might just stop driving because it's so much more friendly. But yeah, anyway, appreciate the baked goods.
We'll see. Before we, I guess, get into our reading, you have some items. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Either way, what's easier with editing?
Doesn't matter.
I can start if you want. Maybe I'll do one. You do one.
Mine's more related to the reading.
Then let's end with that. That sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, mine are not super related.
Okay.
I've actually got 3.
Okay.
I've got more items this time.
And none of them are videos, right?
No, they're all like articles. Gotcha. So the first is an op-ed that came out in the New York Times a few days ago by Rachel Connolly called "The Tyranny of the Best." And I really liked it. And I wanted to bring it up because I feel like it has particular call outs for both of us.
Uh-huh.
And it was just really interesting because I hadn't thought about the fact that this has become a phenomenon even within my lifetime. All these lists for every single product that you can think of that has like best of. Right. So like Wirecutter, the New York Times, like things like that.
These are ads, by the way.
Yeah.
And I tell you that.
I
like,
know.
No!
I still feel like Wirecutter is
Not
so
Wirecutter.
legit. Yeah.
That's how they make money.
But I'll just read a brief quote and we can talk about it a little bit. But she said, quote, "I've been wondering about where this culture of ratings and rankings came from and how it came to take over our lives. How even the least exciting consumer choices are framed in terms of elusive state-of-the-art options. And conversely, how necessarily subjective things, novels, colleges, where to live, are increasingly presented as consumer choices for which there is an objective best." And so I thought of this because sometimes you're very into like finding the most optimal thing.
Yeah.
Though, I mean, it has a lot of benefit, but it is interesting to think about. And she talked about, and I thought this really reminded me of you, this one case study of a friend that she has who likes to find like the best of each object, and how for him it's like a way of caring for other people to be like, look, like I want you to have the most comfortable experience like in my home, or like the best experience. Then she also talked about people who really plan out trips as being similar. I thought that was funny because that part is like me, but the optimal part is more like you.
Yes.
And I love planning out trips, but I am flexible. It's not like I plan for the best experience and then I get really upset if it's different. But I do I'm one of those people who love to do like a ton of research ahead of time of like where to eat and like what to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, any thoughts about that? I just thought it was kind of interesting to think about that as an increasing phenomenon.
I mean, I will say for me, the reason that I like spend a lot of time researching a lot of like purchases, and they don't have to be huge purchases, but sometimes they are, right? Like if we're getting a sofa or a bed or a chair or something or a coat, I really like to dive in on like what people are saying on forums. I usually start with Reddit and then go from there, but and I'll type in like the basic questions that I have about the thing and then just kind of go from there. But I feel like in the aggregate, one, you can kind of figure out which one is the best by like what people are saying and all the things that they took into consideration, and then you can incorporate that into your calculation or evaluation of the thing. And for me, it's a lot of trying to avoid a lot of the marketing that's out there. So even the Wirecutter lists, sometimes I'll look at those, but I'm like, I feel like I know that these people are getting paid based on the products that they move from the things that they're reviewing. So it's not really that trustworthy of a system. So I'll triangulate or like, take that in with like what people are saying on Reddit. And I just feel like there's so much sophisticated marketing out there, and there are a lot of companies that are just making a version of a thing that's slightly worse that you'll use for a little bit and then end up throwing away or not liking. And I'm like, if this is an object that kind of have to interact with on a daily basis or like have in my space or whatever, I really want it to
be optimal. I guess my question is like, just out of curiosity,
or
there's no right or wrong with this, but like, I get the throwing away part, but like, why do you feel like you have a desire to have like the most functioning object for any given thing? Or do you think that's maybe not the case for you? Like it depends on the thing.
Well, when you say most functioning, it's not necessarily like the best at the thing, but it's like the best for me.
Okay. Because what I found interesting about this article was not so much like, you know, I mean, she explained like, like how people make these decisions, but more like the kind of idea that everything can be optimized in our lives. Like to me, that seems like somewhat exhausting.
I don't think it's necessarily, it can be exhausting.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of ways that people do optimize things in their lives that I think are unhealthy. But I think for things like, again, purchasing like material or consumer goods, it's, if you can be, being a little bit more selective is not that bad, because I think it, for me, it somewhat comes out of a, you know, more awareness and trying to avoid just buying a bunch of shit that
so for
breaks
you, it's
over
like
time and then goes into a landfill.
Yeah, got it.
And then also, that makes sense. I like things that are thoughtfully sort of constructed too. Like, I don't know, like I have like, once I find my brand of a thing, I just kind of go there over and over, right? Loyal, so like there's a brand of like a bag maker where I have like my travel bags and my backpack, and like a daily kind of carry bag or whatever. Like, because I know that it's like high quality and it's it's solid.
I think what I found interesting about the article also was this idea of like that we sort of seek novelty in this way, or that like it's a way of like, I don't know, maybe feeling like we have choice when we don't in other parts of our lives, or I don't know, it's something that's interesting. But I agree with you. I think it's smart to like especially research things to make sure that they're not disposable for sure.
But I also think, I mean, a lot of it, you know, is also people, unfortunately, myself included and yourself included, right? In a world that kind of feels like there are fewer and fewer ways to really express yourself. Unfortunately, a lot of our expression is kind of based on
aesthetic,
what we consume.
No, it's totally true.
And what we're able to consume. So there's definitely that element of it of like, this is, you know, found this like niche. It's like our objects episode, right? Like
it was reminding me of that.
And this is how I'm
expressing myself. So, that's interesting.
There's definitely that element to it, but I don't know. I think people are wanting to avoid bad purchases because they're more and more frequent, because again, there are so many people producing the same fucking thing.
Right.
And you don't know who's doing it well and who isn't.
Right. So, I often hear from like recent immigrants, or I have in the past, that it's like almost like super overwhelming in the US, like how much. I've even heard from like relatives from Sweden who are visiting that they go to the grocery store and they see like the like 5 billion cereals and they're just like, whoa, like there's a lot of cereal options that it's like kind of overwhelming, which is interesting. Yeah. All right. Panda Express announced a postdoctoral fellowship in Asian American Studies.
Hell yeah.
There was so much annoying Twitter discourse about this, because of course there was.
Yeah.
People were making fun of it, which I feel like is totally fair because it's objectively hilarious.
Do you have to only eat Panda Express?
I don't think so. But like, people were like, you know, what's next? Like the Quiznos, whatever. Like we're all just gonna have corporate sponsorships.
You kind of already do.
Well, that's what people were saying is like, we are in essence like Ford Foundation, for example, and like, you know, like is actually a real postdoctoral fellowship that I did not get.
Like the Soros
fellowship,
totally. You know, it's not any better.
But then some people were like, you know, why would you look down on this like Asian-owned family business? And I was like, okay, come on, it sounds funny. It's like, first of all, it's not a family business. Second of all, like, I get it. Like we all already corporately sponsored, but like it just still seems hilarious. It's like a new territory, I think, to be like sponsored by a fast food chain.
Yeah. Where is it again? You said it's at Princeton?
It's no, it's at UPenn.
UPenn.
Yeah. So it's like a
That's
really
awesome.
great, it's like honestly very well paid. If anyone is listening, $65,000. I mean, if I was still in the market, I'm sure I would have applied to that.
Do you at least get like a Panda Express discount
I don't think
for
so.
the duration? You don't get it. You just get the
I
money.
I think it's just sponsored by them. Yeah.
So it's for Asian American studies.
Yep. I thought it was a joke when I first saw it. I was like, this is like a stupid joke. And then I clicked on the link and I was like, oh, this is a real postdoc.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that fucking rocks. I think that's incredible.
Who do you want to be your corporate benefactor?
Kmart?
I think you saw
'Cause
an
I used to
abandoned
go-
Kmart once and
yeah.
you were like really happy. Yeah.
No. What, was it abandoned?
I think so. You like took a bunch of photos of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't know why. I loved Kmart so much as a kid.
Oh. Did you go there often with your family?
We went pretty often.
Nice.
Anyway,
Kmart.
yeah, I'd bring back Kmart.
If Kmart's listening,
Mm-hmm.
give my man an arts
Yeah.
what
What about you?
foundation. I don't know.
Oh,
Oh, Uniqlo.
Uniqlo?
Yeah, I love Uniqlo.
That's fair. The other one I would do, actually, here's the one that would actually sponsor is I would like to be sponsored by Wagh Bakri, which is the Indian tea brand
Yeah.
that I use for chai production.
Smart.
So if they want to sponsor a South Asian sort of what's it called? Appropriation sort of studies.
You would like to take that?
Yeah,
That's a good call. I mean, honestly, if we could get anything for Caravanserai sponsored, I'd be down.
that'd be dope.
Yeah. I mean, not by anyone, but by anything
Yeah.
Spice affiliated.
Yeah, fuck it. I'll take a, what is it? Raytheon.
Yeah.
If y'all want to throw me some dollars.
All right. My last item is Salman Rushdie made his first public appearance since I think it was about a year ago where
He
he
got
was
stabbed,
attacked.
right?
Yeah, he was stabbed.
In the
And-
eye?
I think so. Yeah, he's still wearing an eye patch.
Nice.
Um,
That's a cool look.
At the PEN America Gala, which I hadn't heard much about, but apparently it's like this gala dedicated to free speech. And I wanted to note it for a couple of reasons. One, I love Rushdie. He's a pain in the ass. I'm sure he's like a terrible person.
Yeah.
I've heard his ex-wife has gone on the record saying that he was just like super inattentive, like really rude, like
I mean, he
not
seems
interested in her as a human being.
like a narcissist. He's a
Yeah, but he's a
narcissist.
beautiful writer. Like,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I love his writing. And I don't know, a lot of the free speech discourse has gotten kind of weird, and some of the people who are really into it tend to be very right.
Uh-huh.
But I still think it's important, like I mean, obviously, not only do
Free speech is important.
yeah, not only do I think that Rushdie should not be stabbed, which is not a controversial take,
Yeah.
but I also think that, I mean, a lot of Muslims obviously have had issue with his writing, and I
Yeah.
personally think that it's like fucking brilliant. Like, he's probably my favorite author that's alive.
Mm.
And yeah, I don't know. It was cool to see him back out there. I'm glad. I met him once. I went to one of his readings at Harvard,
Mm-hmm.
and
Did he try to sleep with you?
no, he did not.
Okay.
But he did he signed one of my books, and I said my name was Yasmin, and he was like, like it meant something. I was like, okay. And that was it.
Cool.
But I actually, at that talk, he was thoughtful. I appreciated it because he actually mentioned, this was before he was, stabbed more recently, but he mentioned actually being aware of the fact that some of his kind of comments on free speech have been taken out of context, and that he still thinks that it's important to, not incite violence and that sort of thing. It was more nuanced than I expected, actually, or that he's been framed by the press.
Oh.
But yeah, I love me some Rushdie. I love his writing. If
Yeah.
folks haven't read him, I would probably suggest Midnight's Children as a starting point. But I personally like the infamous Satanic Verses is one of my favorite books. I think it's excellent. I would still read that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's just kind of back.
But he wasn't no one knew that he was going to be at this gala. He just kind of was on stage. So he made
Oh.
a splash in his re-entrance into public life.
Did he say anything?
He gave a speech. Yeah.
But was there any of the speech that you wanted to share, or?
Nah, just
No?
the fact that I want people to know he's doing
He's
all right.
back.
He's back. Yeah. He's still out there.
So- In case people want to stab him, or
No,
what's the?
no, just in case they're also fans of his
Interested,
writing or
okay.
interested in him, just to know that he's still going.
Do not stab him.
And also, if anyone has avoided reading him because they are afraid that it's blasphemous, I personally think that I would suggest that they still read him. If you like any kind of magical realism, if you're into South Asian diaspora studies, I think he's a great read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also ironically had, and then I'll let go of Rushdie, a very like religious experience reading satanic verses. So I personally think it is not satanic.
Okay. Despite the name.
Yeah. I'll share it real fast. I think I've told you this before, but the book begins with this character named Jibril, like after the angel Gabriel, falling through the sky and actually transforming into a literal angel. And this other man whose name I can't remember, who's like the main narrator, is also falling through the sky, but he's kind of transforming into like a devil-like character.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really great commentary throughout the book on kind of racial caricature and sort of like some of the characters who really tried hard to be white passing, like become animals, like in the ways that they've been described by other people.
Yeah.
But anyway, Jibril is like a kind of actor, and he's becoming like a literal angel. And I was rereading the book, and I was on a bus in Chicago, and I like sat next to an old man named Gabriel, and he was like really lovely, and I was really lost and really sad, and we had a really nice conversation, and I was just like, damn, felt like some divine intervention.
And he wasn't Satan.
No, I feel like if anything, he was a good guy. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Okay.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Okay. One narcissist to another. I have a short video of an interview of Elon Musk.
Oh, no.
Talking about his kind of stance on working from home.
All right.
Look, I'm a big believer that people are more productive when they're in person, and really, man, the whole sort of work from home thing. It's like, I think it's. Look, there are some exceptions, but I kind of think that the whole notion of work from home is a bit like the fake Marie Antoinette quote, "Let them eat cake." Mm-hmm. It's like really, you're going to work from home, and you're going to make everyone else who made your car come work in the factory. You're going to make the people who make your food that gets delivered that they can't work from home. The people that come fix your house, they can't work from home, but you can. Does that seem morally right? That's messed up.
You see it as a moral issue?
Yes.
I mean, I see it more as just
it's a productivity issue, but it's also a moral issue. People should get off the goddamn moral high horse with the work from home bullshit. Because they're asking everyone else to not work from home while they do.
And yet there's still pushback, by the way. It's still going on. This battle is still happening. I mean, leaders of organizations, and I speak to plenty.
Yeah, I mean, there's more to the clip, but I just saw that and I was so infuriated because he's such a piece of shit.
He is, yeah.
And what's on display here is just kind of like less than baby level logic.
Yeah.
Of being like, well, these people have to go to the office and these don't. These have to, or they have to go to the factories and that's unfair. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, right. And he doesn't apply that same level of logic of like, oh, they're forcing these other people to go. He's like, well, bitch, you don't have to be a billionaire.
I was going to say, the obvious like point of that logic is like, it's a little unfair that I have billions of dollars and everyone else has to work these menial ass jobs.
No, of course not. And you can tell that throughout the interview, as he's kind of like finding his footing in this argument, he's becoming more and more confident in it. He's like, yeah,
right.
Well, yeah, they have to, and it's just morally wrong. They need to get off their moral high horse or whatever. And I'm like, you're an absolute just smooth brain, like level moron.
The only positive thing about Elon taking over Twitter is I feel like more and more people now are aware of what a moron he is. Like even the kind of bros before who were like, but he's brilliant.
As CEO, yeah.
Right, but he still owns the thing.
Yeah.
Like he's not brilliant. Like he's just a guy with a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think it's so stupid that he's framing it as unfair. One, sure, pay the factory workers more. Right? Like I'm sure there are some things about working in a factory that's harder than working behind a laptop.
Absolutely, of course, yeah.
Pay them more. Or let's talk about automating all those jobs and then still expanding the welfare state so that people still get
universal
paid.
Income, yeah.
But he's not going to do that.
Nah.
Because he wants to distract from the fact that he's a billionaire.
Right.
And that he'll make money either way, whether it's by crushing people or owning robots.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I think later in the episode he calls people the laptop class. So the people who want to work from home. And I was just like, fuck off. Like they work for you. It's not like people are having fun and not working. They're working from their homes because
Right.
they don't need to fucking go to an office where you're going to be breathing down their necks, or where they have to have pretend work
Right.
for half of their day at least.
Yeah. A lot of the people who weren't able to quit Twitter or who weren't let go are folks who are on visas that like are not super flexible and like are not able to seek other employment.
Yeah.
And they're potentially working from home, but not necessarily happy about it or feeling comfortable working with him as CEO.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I love that he's trying to frame it as a class issue between workers
Right.
and create a divide between like people who work from home and people who work in a factory, when he's a fucking billionaire. Like, it just blows my mind.
No, you're right. It's absurd.
Absolute piece
I
of
feel
shit.
like we only watched a tiny bit, but does the
Baby
anchor
brain.
eventually like push back more? Because that seems like kind of ridiculous.
The
to kind
interviewer?
of, yeah.
Oh no, this is like CNBC.
Okay, yeah.
It's just like, oh, I love you, Elon. Or you're so right. Like,
Right.
yeah, they don't no pushback at all
Yeah.
because they want him to keep coming on the program.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, that was it.
All right. So, speaking of shitty bosses, today we're going to talk about the first couple of chapters. I think we read the first 4 chapters.
First 3.
First 3.
Yeah.
Okay, we read the first 3 chapters of Labor's Giant Step by Art Price.
Mhm.
Price?
Something like
I
that.
don't know how to say that. Which kind of, goes through the first 20 years of the CIO.
Which is the Congress of Industrial Unions.
Yes. And, people know it from AFL-CIO. So at one point there was the AFL, and then the CIO came out of that, and there were 2 separate organizations that then remerged into the AFL-CIO.
Which is the current labor organization, right? I
Yep.
think that they combined in 1955.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
And just so everyone knows the acronyms, I wasn't very familiar.
yeah,
the
go for it.
AFL was the American Federation of Labor. And as we said, the CIO was the Congress of Industrial Unions.
that's right. Yeah. And let me pull up my previous notes on this. So I first read this as part of a socialist alternative discussion when I was involved with that, or when I was in Socialist Alternative.
Which is a
and-
socialist organization nationally.
Yeah, it's a great organization. I haven't, unfortunately, been able to stay involved as of late, but I hope to get back to it. But this was one of our weekly readings, and I thought it was incredible. It was very inspirational, a really interesting account that shows a lot of the different dynamics and things that workers who are organizing need to be wary of, and how there have been instances in the past of very successful and militant labor organizing. So let me find these notes real quick.
While you're finding that, let's give a
Yeah.
little more context. So this
Sure.
is essentially covering like labor struggles in the 1930s. So before these 2 organizations merged, going over the history of the CIO. And the book itself was published in 1964 initially. So it's fairly old scholarship, but I think also really awesome because the edition that we read came out in 1974, and you can like read the book both for the history that it's telling, but also the book itself is like old enough that it's kind of a product of its time in a way that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, all books are products of their time, but I think it's easier to tell that with distance sometimes.
Right.
And the author is really upfront about being a Marxist, which I also appreciate that frankness with positionality and kind of framing this labor history as history that we can learn from in terms of what could have happened differently, and also what happened well that we can learn from in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, a little bit about Art Price, or adding on to that. He was involved in the Toledo Autolite strike, which will be covered in chapter 3 a little bit. He was an organizer, and he joined the Trotskyist movement and became labor editor of a newspaper called The Militant.
Which I hadn't heard of, but the excerpt sounded really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, The Militant had a left kind of opposition platform that was eventually expelled from the Communist Party for fighting against the bureaucratic Stalinists. So as we go through, it kind of in the background, or what's happening is there's a schism between the people who are trying to kind of Stalinize the AFL and the kind of more militant organizers. And then the first 9 chapters of the book were originally published in The Militant.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't
Yeah,
catch
so
that.
this was originally I think a series of articles that he
Interesting.
had written called 20 Years of the CIO.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, a history of class struggle in the U.S. from 1929 to 55. So that's the period he's covering. Do you want me to give a little history or lead up to the Depression?
Yeah, absolutely.
So leading up to the Depression, economic conditions in post-World War I, in large part, a lot of the large industries workers were generally not organized. So there was, conservatism in the AFL, a lack of a working class party, and a Stalinist bureaucracy in the Communist Party, which led to the expulsion of the opposition that was led by Trotsky from the Russian and American parties. And so there was a mistrust of immigrant labor by the AFL to run unions. So the AFL stepped in to run those unions, further contributing to the bureaucratization. So again, I think in a future chapter, we talk about there are smaller kind of like federations of the AFL under the AFL that were organizing, and the AFL was like quickly trying to incorporate those into its like larger bureaucracy. And before in 1919, there was a large steel strike that had been broken on several fronts, and one reason is because the AFL had refused to provide relief for the workers or strike support, and kind of sold the workers out. And so that kind of put a very long kibosh on labor organizing. So workers were kind of dormant and, like I said, disorganized leading up to...
So this is some good context, like up until where the book kind of starts.
Yes,
Got it.
exactly. Yeah. All right, so we'll skip from there and go into the book, and I think we can kind of just go chapter by chapter.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And, I think bear with us because I think there's a lot of really good stuff in here, and I might read some of the larger excerpts that I have highlighted.
We might want to try and summarize them.
Yeah. I'll read them, and then in editing, I'll probably take some of the things out that maybe don't need to be in there. But there's a lot of really good stuff in here. Let me get to chapter 1 here. Was there anything? Did you read the introduction or the preface? Okay. Is there anything from there that you wanted to highlight?
No, not particularly. It was mostly just introducing the book. I think a lot of the history you just covered and the author.
He feels like it's necessary to recall for the newer generations who are reading this the record of the CIO and its achievements and shortcomings, because he feels like there are very important lessons in here, because a lot of what happened during that period has been kind of revised in favor of employers, and it's kind of been used as propaganda. And a lot of the sentiment, like a lot of people will reference FDR as this great labor leader and president, and his account of what has happened in those years kind of contradicts that. So
yeah, I found that, I don't know if you want to have more large scale conversation or if you just want to lead us through line by line, but I found that really interesting and provocative and helpful.
Yeah.
But I think that there were points that he was kind of really overstating it a bit.
Really?
I understand of course everyday labor movements often don't get the credit that they deserve for the changes that happen. But there were some instances, I can't remember specifically, where it was okay, and then FDR adopted this into legislation, but it was really only because there was so much popular will, and and I get that, and I'm sure that's true, but I don't know, I thought it was a little bit there were so many other good points about FDR not being as pro-labor as one would have thought, that I thought that it was sort of unnecessarily stated in some other instances where it didn't seem like it was as strongly supported by the argument. But yeah.
I found myself agreeing with him, and I think he'll continue to make the case kind of as we go through the chapters. But that's interesting. And again, he doesn't present himself as an objective,
right? Which there's no
narrator.
need to. Yeah, for sure.
I think also on page 4, I just have highlighted some things about, he's going back to the origin of the CIO dates to the fateful year of 1929, the beginning of the Great Depression. And, everyone had referred to the 20s as the golden 20s, as this post-war economic boom, and things were going great. But again, as we said earlier, labor had been pretty much disorganized, and no one really caught on to it, right? So in 1929, I'm going to read a little bit here. The Militant in February of 1929, containing the platform of the left opposition, which was expelled from the Communist Party in 1928 for fighting bureaucratic Stalinism, This forerunner of the Socialist Workers' Party, analyzing the economic situation, reported that that already there was a standing army of unemployed workers numbering several millions and a growing series of wage cuts. It stated, American capitalism has been unable to overcome the serious depressions in agriculture and in the coal, textile, lumber, oil, shipping, and other industries, nor will it be able to prevent the coming decline in iron and steel and automobile industries. The internal contradictions of American imperialism, bound up with its world economic interdependence, are maturing a severe crisis.
What page are you on? Sorry.
So this is it's going from 5 to 6, top
Okay.
of 6. And so here they are kind of in February predicting that not all is well, right? To the contrary, I think of the head of the AFL and also the Secretary of Labor or something, who were saying that things were generally good and that I don't see anything wrong.
Right.
The militant is already saying, hey, there's actually discontentment amongst the workers.
Yeah. And then I think the next paragraph I had highlighted, I thought was interesting, just kind of basically saying that it's mostly folks who are doing quote unquote unskilled or semi-skilled workers that are kind of bearing the brunt of the depression, and that was like not sustainable, or the upcoming depression.
Yeah. So the cool thing is that, again, this paper, which proves to be very important kind of in the movement, is really embedded and knows what's going on among the rank and file workers, and is a good barometer. And do you feel like we have anything like that anymore?
The thing is that even at this time, this was probably such a small subsection of workers who actually were subscribed to this newspaper and talking about it. So I think if you think about it that way, we probably do. Mm-hmm. It's also, this is like the time period that I work in, though obviously very different stuff or content, but it's also a cool reminder of how like important newspapers used to be, even for really small scale movements, like that was kind of a way that people communicated and talked in a way that I don't think happens on a large scale level anymore.
Yeah.
Especially these kind of like local niche newspapers, or this isn't local, but really specific issue based.
Yeah. One day we should go over like some of Lenin's writing on like the importance of like the newspapers and the parties and stuff. But
I guess you could argue that like some social media platforms kind of take that place now, but it's not quite the same thing.
Because it's not owned by the workers.
Right. Right. Yeah, definitely.
Also in that paragraph, again, the paper is very much seeing its own role in this larger labor movement. It says the task of class-conscious militants, the paper pointed out, was to turn these unorganized masses and lead in the work of organizing them into new industrial unions. So again, predicting that there was discontent among the workers and that there were a series of contradictions in the U.S. economy that were going to lead to a crisis.
Yeah, this also makes me think it's kind of interesting to think about before the like heyday of McCarthyism in the 40s and 50s. Like I actually don't know much about this. I wonder if there's a kind of in-between time period where it's not yet as dirty of a thing to kind of be associated with communism in a kind of like newspaper, for example.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see that.
Yeah. The paper had written this in February, and then the collapse happened in October of that same year, right? And there were an estimated 1.5 million homeless.
And sort of the bottom of that page just talks about how the AFL was not really doing anything to address the crisis of the Depression.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And then I think at the kind of the close of the chapter, he starts to just kind of paint a picture of how things were deteriorating, right? So by 1931, total wages and salaries were halved over 1925. A few months after the stock market crash, Green, who I think was a leader of the AFL, attended a conference of employers. And I think here the point is he kind of sold out the workers, right? So the AFL leader pledged a no strike policy to the employers, which is definitely not what you're supposed to do as
a union leader. Yeah.
If the employers pledged to not cut wages, right? So they came to what he calls a gentleman's agreement, and it turns out that the only gentleman was Green, the leader of the AFL, because in June and July of 1930, 60 corporations and industries announced wage cuts, and the AFL did not do anything.
Right.
And then at the bottom of that same page, he talks about how the membership in the AFL began to dwindle from at 1920, it was 4 million, and then in 1933, sorry, it was 2 million. So it pretty much halved.
Yeah.
So that's chapter 1, just kind of talking about the collapse and depression, start of the Depression.
Yeah. And then chapter 2 kind of transitions from the Hoover administration to Roosevelt's administration, kind of makes the overarching point, which is definitely a good one, that comparatively, like, Roosevelt was better on labor than Hoover, but not as, strong as you would think.
Right. So he's saying that people generally would refer to Roosevelt as like a strong labor president, but only because they were comparing him to Hoover, who was pretty awful. This is where I think, what you were saying earlier about him just kind of maybe being in some cases harsh. I don't think
harsh. I just think biased to the point of kind of underselling his argument a bit.
Okay. On this page, he has a quote from the Secretary of Labor, from Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor, who did an interview after Roosevelt's death in 1945. He says she spilled the beans about the New Deal and wrote that when Roosevelt took office in March 1933, the New Deal was not a plan with form or content. It was a happy phrase he had coined during the campaign, and its value was psychological. It made people feel better. And I, and maybe, maybe I'm biased to the point where I'm like, yes, that sounds like that's definitely the case, because you can think back to, the Obama hope and change sort of thing is like a much more diluted even version of like a New Deal, right? Where there was all, it was kind of like an empty variable, and you could put whatever you wanted into it and read into it what you want, but it ultimately didn't really amount to much. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. There were some specific indictments that were really interesting. So on page 11, there's relief jobs were systematically increased before national elections, and hundreds of thousands were fired shortly after the votes were counted, which is like awful. So the Work Project Administration, for example, it seems like laid a lot of people off right before or right after Roosevelt was elected.
Yeah, so they could just get those numbers.
Yeah. But then there was like sorry.
I don't know. I'm saying that it's just like a tactic that happens a lot, I think, with like a lot of like tax credit programs where like we help this many people, and then they just let them expire.
Yeah, which is awful.
There's after these metrics.
And also it just speaks to like how much we are stuck in a cycle of like only existing in order to elect a new person who doesn't change very much.
Yeah.
How much we operate in a country on a kind of election-based cycle.
Yeah.
And then I also appreciate this point on page 12, that essentially like Roosevelt's program for the unemployed was generous, again, only by comparison with Hoover's, but that, as the Unemployment League put it, quote, "It's not enough to live on, just too much to die on."
Yeah.
So this idea that it's basically just enough to kind of keep people going, keep workers going, stop them from literally starving, but not enough for people to like flourish. And there's also that question, I think, always when you have these kind of reforms that are more piecemeal than they could be, which is like, why not just have people flourish? Like, why not just go all the way and provide like a better, standard of life?
Well, because then they'd be wanting to do fucking crazy things like work from home. And,
right.
Yeah. And Elon Musk says that's morally wrong.
Right.
Yeah. I want to just hit quickly on page 10. One other thing that's kind of happening in the background here is so a lot of people saw the Depression and the recovery as a moment that was very decisive in that it kind of decided which path the country would take. And one of the first major official acts taken by the Roosevelt administration was that he bailed out the big banks. And I was just like, again, I highlighted that and I wrote next to it, sound familiar?
Right.
We just had a bank crash. We've had a series of multiple bank crashes. One happens every 7 years, and every single time we bail them out. And what happens, and what happened here is that, and I'll read directly from here, is so his first major official act after he took office on March 4th, 1933 was to save the big banks and big depositors at the expense of the small banks and small depositors. His bank moratorium on withdrawals of deposits and other emergency bank measures consolidated the big banks, while thousands of small ones never opened again or paid back only a fraction of their deposits. And later on, he says, he's quoting someone, "Some felt at the time, and have continued to believe since, that this was a moment when the country and Congress would have followed the president in making the banks national property. Such an action would have meant that the New Deal, instead of reforming glaring defects in order to preserve the capitalist system, would have set about superseding it." And later on, it's said that, he says, "Capitalism was saved in 8 days. The man who promised to drive the money changers from the temple actually gave them a new lease on it."
This book also makes the point really poignantly that capitalism doesn't actually operate well on its own. Like, it does require, there's this kind of idea of like the free market just kind of operating independently, but it requires government bailout like pretty consistently in order to operate. It's not like a system that works on its own.
Yeah, I think that's well put. I don't have much else to add to that. I do think that there's this myth that's just perpetuated, and it's very pervasive, right? Like, a lot of these influencers who just talk about free market and business and like how good it is, because there's an idea that whatever is natural is good.
Exactly.
Right?
And it's not natural. Yeah.
And so they're like, yeah, and the free market is just the natural way that people are meant to exist. And they say free market and capitalism interchangeably. But there's nothing natural about capitalism.
I mean, not only that, but it requires government support in order to like function, Yeah,
there's nothing natural about a system in which like, one person owns like an entire industry, and then they slowly grow and grow and grow until most of the population is left on, starving wages. Like, I don't understand.
I think there's also the point even today with thinking about bank bailouts that, aside from like, well, the question of could you nationalize the banks, that is okay, but that other kinds of bailouts for everyday people obviously never get the same kind of weight or are never like first priority. Not bailout so much as like basic structural support.
I mean, you can even contrast just the most recent bank bailout with Silicon Valley and all these other banks. And how quickly the government acted, and then during a global pandemic, how long it fucking took and how painstaking it was to just send people a $1,600 or $1,200 check.
At the same time, it was also so crazy. I remember I got my like COVID unemployment check, and I was like, wow, they could always just do this. Like, they actually have the capacity to just like send us money, and they choose not to. It's kind of crazy.
But there was all this hand wringing.
Oh, absolutely. No, it was also
like,
compared
to
like
destroy the economy.
Yeah, compared to most like Western European nations, for example, like the amount that we got was laughable. It was like 2 one-time payments that were very minimal. It was not anything that you could live off of if you were, laid off of your job. I feel like, it was not the same situation as the Depression, but hearing this description also reminds me of the beginning of COVID, that it felt like it might have been a moment that was transformative, and that unfortunately it wasn't. Like, life kind of paused, and there was a sort of question of like, how will things change? And
exactly the same with the Great Depression, right? It was like, again,
and then unfortunately, some changes.
It's very cyclical. It's just, it was a moment where, had the right leaders been in place, it could have been a totally revolutionary moment.
Right.
And there's a missed opportunity. One thing also on page 12, which I think is where you were, so it mentions that kind of, it continues to call the main prop of the Roosevelt myth is that he gave American labor the right to organize. So he says that, one of the reasons that Roosevelt gets all this credit is a lot of it is based on the NRA, and specifically Section 7A of the NRA, which stands for National Recovery Act.
Not the other NRA. Yeah.
Right. And so enacted on June 1933. And people are saying, people say like, this is what gave laborers the right to organize. And he's saying really Section 7A didn't really do anything that wasn't already there, right? Because there was already a ton of union membership, and
I think more than that, at least on like page 13, he's arguing that workers, I'll just give a quote here, many workers undoubtedly were misled into thinking that 7A meant that the government really would protect them and their right to join a union. So that the way that this when this law came into being in 1933, a lot of everyday people and a lot of people who are part of unions thought that this meant that the president was going to have their back. And that was in fact not the case. So they were kind of like almost led astray by the law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll see some examples of that in chapter 3.
Yeah.
So chapter 3 is called War on Labor under the NRA. Do you want to start off with anything here, or?
Yeah, just kind of ending first with chapter 2. I appreciated this like slight concession because again, I think this can be a little bit polemical to the point where like I personally find it not hard to read, but like less engaging than some scholarship that I'm used to. But I appreciated the end of chapter 2. So the author writes, but even if section 7A played a certain part in helping to organize some workers, it could not keep them organized or protect them against boss reprisals. So kind of this, I like appreciated that sort of level of nuance there, that there were some benefits of this law, but not as much as was needed, obviously. And chapter 3 illustrates that.
And he even says that it actually, well, at the very least, it had the effect of getting some of the union and labor leaders off their, like, or the labor bureaucrats out of their chairs, and
right?
Do a little organizing at
totally.
least.
Yeah, and then chapter 3 begins by saying that again, that this section was also kind of incidental and afterthought, and not the main kind of part of the law. I had this highlighted here, that the government exempted from the requirements of the antitrust laws those industries which agreed to the codes. So you basically have this kind of issue where the industries themselves are able to set the codes through which they're being evaluated. That's kind of how I understood it, which is obviously massively problematic as opposed to the government just setting like, here's what it means for you to not be a monopoly. Here's,
right.
basic like standards of conduct.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I'm a giant trust.
Right.
And
it's really crazy. It's so similar to today, like when the Silicon Bank Valley folded.
Silicon Valley Bank.
Sorry, the Silicon Valley Bank. You get the idea. Folded, and there was like issues or kind of concerns about smaller banks folding. Really, like governments globally have turned to bigger banks to kind of regulate the smaller ones, as opposed to like the governments themselves kind of creating regulation. There's this idea that like, almost like an encouragement of monopoly and encouraging kind of banks to merge and become larger.
And that happened. I don't have the exact statistic, but there was like a massive bank consolidation in the 2008. And also again with the most recent crash, I think Silicon Valley, and they a lot of those banks got bought up by other banks. And lots of consolidation.
And then some kind of more damning specifics about for coal and auto industries, the unions essentially not doing due diligence and having the minimum wage fixed like lower than it could have been.
Yeah. So I have my first highlight on page 16 here. Just kind of talking about there's all this, all these wage cuts going on, and these or wage freezes, and the miners in Western Pennsylvania,
where we'll be soon, started to strike, right?
Or organize. So reading directly here, if the workers had rights under this law, which cannot be taken from them, as Roosevelt claimed, the coal miners couldn't find what these rights were. The murderous opposition of the employers to the unions is typified in the following account of one event in the strike of coal miners in steel company captive mines of Western Pennsylvania. The August 5th, 1933 militant reported.
We have a lot of the same highlights. It's really cute.
Really?
Sorry, I keep going. Yeah.
The miners' wives from the outset joined directly in the battle, taking the blows with their husbands and giving blows as their powerful picket line extended over a far-flung territory. One miner is reported killed in typical Pennsylvania Steel Trust fashion, shot down in cold blood by company plug uglies while carrying the America flag at the head of the picket line. Several other miners are, I have a weird printing issue here, are expected to die from wounds received, and many are suffering from
light injuries.
Okay. Yeah. Just the start of the next paragraph. The treacherous role of both Roosevelt and his labor lieutenants was shown in the mine strike. Roosevelt ordered an investigation of communism in the strike. So just
I do think Roosevelt was under a lot of pressure to distinguish himself from communism in order to be palatable to the American public and to say that he was socialist and not, democratic socialism as opposed to communism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think he would probably see that as like you're kind of selling out the workers and capitulating to a lot of these like capitalists and et cetera.
And the author kind of highlights essentially towards the end of the chapter that really the radical workers who are part of the AFL sort of set the stage for labor to actually become like effective in this time period. So it wasn't like a really top down injunction. It was sort of like everyday workers that were like, hey, we need to like be organizing in more militant terms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to kind of summarize the highlights that I have on page 18, he's kind of saying that the AFL really failed to stand up for the workers at this point, and that actually there were kind of like what you said, right? There were these moments where the rank and file were really starting to become more and more militant and starting to organize, but the AFL was trying to kind of bureaucratize in a way that was anathema to the movement and kind of felt like it was taking the wind out of their sails, because again there was this Stalinist bureaucratic strain within the AFL.
Do you think, I mean, I don't think even the author, I think that's like super interesting, but do you think the author really is that focused on the kind of like actual ideology of Stalinism and more invested in the idea of like bureaucracy versus like workers who actually were organizing?
No, I think this was like a real, difference between, down here he says, many radicalized workers, particularly those under the Communist Party, parentheses, Stalinist influence, at that time rejected participation in the AFL unions. The Stalinists were then following the line of building separate revolutionary unions and called all other labor organizations social fascist. So there is this kind of split between kind of and the left party was expelled from the Communist Party. So there was this schism, and I think a lot of them were seeing what was happening in Russia at the time with the bureaucratization under Stalin, and some went that direction, and others who kind of followed the more Trotskyist strain were the ones who I think he would say the more militant organizers. And then the last chapter was it's titled "3 Strikes That Paved the Way." Just to kind of high view of this chapter, he goes through 3 different strikes that happened in 1934. First one being the Autolite strike in Ohio, Toledo, Ohio, the Minneapolis truckers strike in Minneapolis, and San Francisco general strike. And these all happened again in 1934. What are your initial impressions of this chapter?
It was really cool. I think it's probably actually, even though I forgot that I read it, one of the better chapters in that it's just like really helpful to learn this history. It's not history that I learned growing up.
No.
I appreciate like how specific it was in terms of covering each strike.
I wasn't really surprised to read any of the information in the chapter, but it was crazy to kind of read it in this much detail, just knowing the extent to which employers went to get their workers back in the factories and to really demoralize them and stamp them down to the point where they had no choice but to go back to work. They used cops, National Guard, private police, strike breakers, everything they could, and resulted in several deaths. But we'll go through some of these in detail. Is there anyone in particular you want to start with, or anything?
No, I think just like really summarizing is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think in the start with the Autolite strike, one of the first tactics that they use is, they try to be friendly and say, we got to take this to arbitration or whatever, whenever workers strike. And so the auto company went to a friendly judge, right? So just kind of showing that even if you have the protections under the NRA, protections in print or quotes, there are still ways that employers will try to get around the spirit of the law, right? And so they'll go to the judge who has to rule on this thing, knowing that the judge is going to be friendly to them and try to get a favorable ruling. So
feels very similar to thinking about like how politicized like the Supreme Court has become today, and how a lot of Congress people are sponsored by various industries.
Yeah. And just kind of the extent to which different parties, whenever they're in office, obviously, like people like to present these judges as just arbiters of truth, right? But obviously there's a reason that they stack all these federal judgeships with people who are going to be friendly to their.
It's kind of sad, but
ideology.
it makes sense given the politics that have created the situation that we're in. But apparently, like, belief in the judiciary system is at like an all-time low. Like, American approval ratings are like lower than they've ever been. Yeah.
I didn't know that was a thing people measured.
Yeah. Like confidence in the Supreme Court.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, don't blame them. It kind of sucks.
It's true.
Yeah. So that was the first highlight I have. My next one is on page 22. Do you have anything before that?
Mm-mm. Oh, I guess one thing that's helpful about the auto light strike, I had at the kind of bottom of page 20 that the officials in the Federal Automobile Workers Union would have lost the strike if left to their own resources. But the dynamic intervention of a revolutionary workers organization, so the American Workers' Party, kind of helped in terms of the strike playing out.
He calls it one of the most amazing battles in U.S. labor history. The Marines had landed in the form of the National Guard, but the situation was not well in hand. With their bare fists and rocks, the workers fought a 6-day pitched battle with the National Guard. They fought on rooftops, from behind billboards, and came through alleys to flank the guardsmen. The men in the mob shouted vile epithets at the troops, complained the Associated Press, and the women jeered them with suggestions that they'd go home to mama and their paper dolls. So just already fights in the street. And then later on May 24th, the guardsmen fired point blank into the Autolite strikers' ranks, killing 2 and wounding 25, but 6,000 workers returned at dusk to renew the battle.
And then you can go down to Friday, May 31st. The troops were eventually ordered to be withdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
And by June 1st, 98 out of 99 AFL local unions had voted for a general strike. So ultimately ended in a general strike.
Yeah. So I think next he talks about the Minneapolis trucker strike. He said the things that I have highlighted here are just about the flying squadrons. Did you have anything before that?
No.
So he said one of the outstanding features of the strike is the cruising picket squad. This idea came from the ranks and played a great role in the strike. So one thing that they did was, the workers quickly took control of the trucking operations. So all trucking in the city was halted except for milk, ice, and beer drivers who were organized and operated with special union permission or permits.
So that there were no strike breakers.
Yep, exactly. And they made sure, they just had control of everything. But later on, he kind of talks about how the correlation of forces becomes a little unbalanced because the police and the guardsmen had guns and the workers did not. So they picked out a striker, a big man and utterly fearless, sent him in with a truck of 25 pickets. He was instructed to drive right into the formation of cops and stop for nothing. We knew he'd do it. Down the street he came like a bat out of hell with his horn honking and into the market arena. The cops held up their hands for him to stop, but he kept on. They gave way and he was in the middle of them. The pickets jumped out onto the cops. We figured by intermixing with the cops in hand-to-hand fighting, they would not use their guns because they would have to shoot cops as well as strikers. Cops don't like that. So just the image is incredible, right?
Yeah, and also some very specific tactics. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, cops are not your friends.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the friend of the worker. And this is, a long storied history of them being just traitors. The governor declared martial law. Military commanders began handing out their own permits for trucks to operate under the protection of the troops. Soon, thousands of trucks were being manned by scabs and strike breakers. The union did not take it lying down. The leaders gave an ultimatum to Olson to withdraw the permits and to issue others only with the union's approval. And eventually, after 5 weeks of battling against all the forces of the employers and the government, the strikers won. The bosses capitulated and signed an agreement granting the union its main demands. This included the right to represent inside workers, which the employers had threatened to fight to the bitter end as industrial unionism.
Was inside workers? I don't remember.
This included the right to represent inside workers. You know, I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, it's in quotation marks down there. I'm not. And then the last strike was the San Francisco General Strike. Do you have any notes on this?
No, I'm happy to just do the same thing. You can give a summary.
I actually don't have a ton highlighted specifically on the San Francisco General Strike. My next notes are kind of at the end of the chapter, but again, he's presenting these as saying it's important to know these three strikes because they're good examples of labor struggle and kind of reinvigorated the labor movement in the U.S. after it had been dormant for so long. And he says that, you know, this directly led to the formation of the CIO and its kind of increasing militancy over the next couple of years.
It's a cool time to read this also, just knowing that there have been so many strikes this year, like both locally, nationally. There's so many like major national corporations like Starbucks where local workers have been striking across the country.
Yeah.
So it is a cool time to kind of revisit this history and think about the power of strikes to make massive changes across labor.
It's I think it's a super important time to read it because I also think that while here you have like two visions of what unionism looks like, right? Like, so there's the AFL, whose leaders were really, again, becoming very bureaucratic and whose goals were to prevent strikes through negotiations with employers. They weren't really on the side of labor,
right?
Even when times were like very bad, and they often sold out the workers. And so I think it's just an important lesson to know that even the union is not necessarily an end unto itself, right? Like the union is susceptible to a lot of bad incentives.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good reminder also that unions have to be good faith actors and they have to be serving the interests of those people who are in them. It's not enough to just say, hey, we have a union.
Yeah.
Yeah. Though, I mean, in this country at this point, I mean, union labor is so much less than it used to be even like in the 60s. That having a union is a good start. And we're in North Carolina here. We're in a quote unquote right to work state, which makes unionizing quite difficult.
Yeah, it also kind of just shows you like we're very much playing from behind because now we're at a point where thankfully there is increasing union activity.
There is. I mean, REI locally was just striking in Durham, which is great. But I mean, even on campus, like there's been talk about a graduate student. I'm like sighing already, but there's been talk about the fact that we need a graduate students union. But a lot of internal politics that prevented that.
Yeah.
But whenever we threaten to strike, and when I mean we, I mostly mean the history department because they're very strike happy, probably because they read this kind of stuff and are aware of this history, we get incredible concessions. So it's a powerful tool. We haven't actually had to strike yet. Just the threat of the strike has created minimal increases, but at least some movement.
Which probably tells you there's more on the table.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Especially for graduate student organizing, man. I mean, I could go on about that forever, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's I would definitely recommend people read this. I would definitely
recommend. Yeah,
at least the first 4 chapters.
For sure. I really appreciated it. It was like I said, it was a lot of specific history I was not aware of, and so that was really cool to learn more about. I really appreciated the kind of layout of the story, that we knew that we were focusing on these 2 decades and that, you know, we were to understand that this was building towards a movement that would later be really important. Yeah, I mean, I think with its biases, but so does everything. And I will say the author is really upfront about those biases. So I really appreciated that.
But I think we need that, right? Like this makes me want to be more diligent about reading like the Socialist Alternative newspaper. And, you know, like DSA has a newsletter.
Right.
Like even it's something like, you know, when people think of leftist written media, they think of Jacobin, which is fine. But even Jacobin, I think, is like a little far removed from everyday rank and file workers, right? And I do feel like there needs to be. I would like to kind of be better about reading things that, you know, we don't have the militant, but at least things that are trying to fill that gap.
In terms of history, or in terms of like current events?
No, in terms of like what's happening currently.
Yeah, I think that there is some good commentary out there. I think also even honestly just reading really local news is a great way to kind of like be more aware of labor history, or not labor history, but like labor change.
I don't even know, because if you're just reading like your local newspaper, which is probably owned by like McClatchy, there's not.
Yeah.
It's not the same.
I think one thing that's kind of unfortunate, like obviously the Militant had a really strong slant in a particular direction, but things are so siloed with media, and I'm a part of this, so I'm not like saying I'm exempt from it, but like people will just kind of like get their media from like one really particular source, and there's not kind of the same sort of like mass ability to kind of read up and consume news in the same way. But
any other closing thoughts on this?
No, I appreciated reading this. It was super interesting. I think that some of the critiques of Roosevelt were a little heavy-handed, but still a helpful perspective.
There you have it, folks. Roosevelt.
Is it Roosevelt or Roosevelt?
I say it's 2 O's, so
I think it's Roosevelt, right? I could be wrong, though.
I say Roosevelt.
Really? Probably doesn't really matter. You're right, because it's like rooster, so it sounds like it should be that.
What's the origin of the name?
I don't know, but I think that he pronounced it Roosevelt.
Roosevelt. Hold on, let's look this up.
Let's see how he says it. How to pronounce Franklin Roosevelt.
Okay. All right. Here's an argument for Roosevelt.
Okay.
Comes from the Dutch Rozenveld, meaning rose field.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So how did the Dutch pronounce it?
Well, I think the question is more, how did FDR pronounce it?
No, because he could have also been wrong.
No, I thought we established the way you say your own name is right. Because like my last name.
Not for white people though.
Okay, but my last name, I say Flodine Ali.
Uh-huh.
And you say Ali.
No, I say when I say your name.
No, you exactly. But like if you were saying Ali for someone else, you would say with the Ain.
Right.
But I pronounce it without that because
Ali.
Yeah, just how I pronounce it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't apply to presidents.
Fair enough. We should probably end
Barack
here.
Obama.
Yeah.
And Franklin Roosevelt.
All right, y'all. Thanks for being with us. We're still deciding on the reading, but I think we'll be discussing more reading next week, which will be fun.
Yeah. All right.
Have
Thanks.
a good one.
Bye.
Bye.